If you are currently leveling up your Django skills with this tutorial, just to let you know, this tutorial is part of a free YouTube playlist, Django Database Structural Testing, where we learn how to set up and utilize Pytest for database structural testing within Django projects. If you like this tutorial and playlist, then also check out our Django Database ORM Mastery course on Udemy. The link to the course and playlist should be found in the video description. Something that you may have noticed, which I wanted to leave for a single individual tutorial, is that we were retrieving warnings when we run our tests. So here you can see we have 7 passed tests, but we have 3 warnings. In the context of Pytest testing framework, a warning is a message that indicates a potential issue in the test code or the application code being tested. So warnings do not cause tests to fail, but they highlight areas that may need attention. In this tutorial, we'll take a look at how to manage warnings effectively, which can help ensure that our test suite will remain robust and that potential issues are addressed proactively. There are many different warnings that you might encounter. Typical warnings that you might encounter in Pytest, the first being a depreciation warning. And in actual fact, we do have a depreciation warning here in my example. So a depreciation warning indicates that a feature or function that we're currently utilizing or we have implemented in our application is depreciated and will be removed in future releases. To better understand this, let's imagine, or in actual fact, in our project, we have a set of requirements, dependencies that our application relies on. So for our application to work correctly, we need to have these dependencies and potentially these particular versions of the dependencies. So let's just imagine that Django was to be updated to 5.0.2. And in that release, the Django developers changed how, for example, they expect users to interact with the Django ORM. So what would happen before that happens is that potentially they would provide a warning so that developers can help prepare for these future changes without immediate disruption. So you can imagine if, for example, Django didn't give us a warning before they made some changes in their code base, what would happen? We would update to Django version 5.0.2 and all of a sudden our code base wouldn't work. So by having these warnings, it will allow us to have advance notice to let us know that potentially something is going to be updated in the future that might need our attention to actually make some changes to ensure that our code base works as intended. Other types of warnings that you might encounter: resource warnings, syntax warnings, import warnings. Now, something else you can see here is we have a Pytest unknown mark warning. Here in Pytest, there are many different ways for us to control how warnings are handled using command line options and configuration settings. Unfortunately, the way to manage these different warnings, the answer to that is that it depends, because some warnings, for example, are or can be false positives. Some warnings might be harmless or context specific. So in actual fact, you don't need to do anything about them at all. In this type of instance where you potentially want to ignore a particular warning, we do have a way of filtering out warnings so they don't appear in our testing interface. So if you head over to the Pytest INI file, we just need to define which tests we would like to ignore. So let's go ahead and use the filter warnings, and we then specify the warnings that we want to filter or ignore. So let's go for ignore, and then we're going to ignore, in this case, the Pytest unknown mark warning. So let's give that a go. So you can see that we have run our tests here. We do actually return this warning. So we have 3 warnings at the moment. So with that implemented, let's run Pytest again. And it looks like we have an attribute error. Module built-ins has no attribute Pytest unknown mark warning. Okay. So the reason why this is because it is not a built-in says built-ins here. So it's not a built-in warning in the Python warnings module. It's specific to Pytest. It's a Pytest issue. It's using its own internal warning mechanisms. So in actual fact, what we need to do here is just extend this to say ignore and then define Pytest dot and then the Pytest specific warning in this case. So let's go ahead now and run Pytest again. And you can now see that we just have one warning, because the warning, the Pytest unknown mark, we have two new marks that we're using that we haven't registered. So therefore that now removes those two warnings that we had previously, and that leaves us with the one warning. So we've learned there are some specific Pytest warnings that we can ignore through identifying the fact it is a Pytest warning and then appropriately defining the filter warning. Now, if we want to, for example, remove this depreciation warning, which is a generic type of warning, let's go ahead and filter that out. So we want to ignore, and this time just the depreciation warning. So let's give that a go. So if we run Pytest again now, we just have 7 passed tests. Now, this is something that does get much deeper. You can go ahead and ignore warnings by message. Take, for example, you only wanted specific Pytest unknown mark warnings to be ignored. You can go ahead and ignore warnings with specific messages. Now, what you might also like to do is to convert warnings into errors. Now, we can do this through the command line. So we could run, for example, the R flag with W, or we could run the W flag here with error, which means that if, for example, Pytest does come across a warning, it's then going to convert that into an error. Now, if that's related to a specific test, that means that a test will then flag as an error. In this case, we have some setup errors, if you like, or warnings, sorry. So in this case, we're not actually going to be running any tests when we run this code, because it's not going to actually get to the test because the warning happens before the test run. So we're just going to return the error in this case. So if I run Pytest with this setup, it's going to hit that error and then return the error code here for us to then inspect and try to resolve. Right, so the last phase here, we're going to actually resolve these problems. We're not going to filter these warnings. We do need to potentially resolve these problems. So let's start off with taking a look at the Pytest unknown mark warning. Now, I do apologize because I didn't give this information when we set up the marks, and this is an extra step that we're going to need to take if we want to utilize our own custom marks. Now, this isn't, as we've already seen, it isn't a mandatory step, but we will receive a warning if we do not actually register our custom marks that we're using. Take a look at our conftest file here. We created some marks that are automatically applied to tests based upon testing names. So what we're going to need to do, because we've added these custom marks, is we can register these marks in our Pytest INI file, and that will resolve the warning. So like I said, this isn't necessarily mandatory, but there are some advantages to registering our custom marks, for example, for documentation and clarity. Consistency. So by registering our marks, we ensure consistent usage across our test suite. So there are many different reasons for us to register our new marks, in addition to avoiding those warnings. So let's go back into our Pytest INI file. We just need to define markers, and that's going to be equals. And then we can just go ahead and define the two markers that we've created, which is model. And then we can add some information about that mark a test as a model test. There we go. And then the second, we have the model structure. So this is going to be a test as a model structure test. There we go. So we've registered our two marks. So let's go ahead now and check that out to see if that has resolved those two warnings. It has. So that leaves us with one warning. So let me show you this second warning. Now, you may not be experiencing this depreciation warning, depending on when you maybe started this project. because there may have been some changes in some of these packages, but potentially this is coming from the site package monkeybiz, which is probably related to the Python monkey business dependency that has been installed. Now, this has been installed because the Django nested admin app that we installed required it for some features that it utilizes. So I just knew that, but however, you can trace this further back. If we use, for example, Pytest with the W flag and error, that's going to give us a trace of potentially where this error occurs. So we can see the reference to monkeybiz here, and maybe a bit further back here, you can see that we have a reference to Django nested admin. So that potentially resolves or gives us enough information to know that it is a problem related to the fact that we installed Django nested admin. So what you might like to do at that point is just check to make sure you've got the latest versions of these packages. And unfortunately, what we can see here is that it was last updated in 2016, which is not necessarily useful in our case, because something is going to be depreciated. It potentially means that we want to make sure we have the latest versions, and that's as of recording 8 years ago. Let's take a look at the Django nested admin. That's being updated, and you can see here, in actual fact, that was last updated in, as a recording, around about 2 years ago. So it doesn't necessarily look good in terms of making sure that as and when the feature is removed, that everything is still going to be working as intended. So we have two options at this point. We can remove Django nested admin. That will obviously remove the Python monkey business dependency as well, or else we can go ahead and just filter out that warning for now and then maybe resolve it in the future. So if you want to uninstall, you can use pip uninstall and then select the packages you want to uninstall. Now, this way you might not potentially know what other packages you need to uninstall, but you would have to do that manually. You'd have to select the Django nested admin, and then you'd need to also specify Python monkey business, and that will then install those packages. There is a different way. We can use the package, just show you the package pip auto remove. So if you install that and then use pip auto remove, and so pip, I think it's pip auto remove, and then select Django nested admin, that will also then try to remove all the dependencies that was installed when we originally installed Django nested admin. The second option, of course, is to create a filter warning. So we want to ignore all the depreciation warnings that has the text PK resources is depreciated as an API. So here we're looking for a particular type of depreciation warning, because we don't want to ignore all of the depreciation warnings that might appear. So this is going to be very specific. PK resources depreciated. So anywhere we have a depreciation warning which has the text PK G resources is depreciated as an API, that's going to be ignored. So we can go ahead now and run Pytest, and we can now see that we have resolved all of our warnings. What I'm going to be doing is actually removing Django nested admin, because it isn't a feature that I need anymore for the rest of the course. It was utilized or introduced as a way of making it possible to nest admin inlines. And of course, you can continue with that. But like I said, we aren't going to be needing it for the rest of the course. So I'm going to delete that for now. And I think in the long term for the code base, that's going to be a better option. So let's see if we can utilize the auto remove. So I've installed the auto remove. So let's try that now to see if we can utilize that to remove Django nested admin, auto remove, and all the dependencies. So let's give that a go. So yes. So you can see all the packages that it has uninstalled. Python monkey business 6. So that looks good to go. So now when we go ahead and pip -r the requirements text, pip freeze, sorry. requirements text got mixed up there. You can see now the requirements text has been updated. There are less packages now in our list. We've removed the Django nested admin and all the other dependencies. And when we run, I'll just remove the filter warning now in Pytest, just to test to make sure that now runs. You can now see there's no module named nested admin. So the problem we've got now is that there is code left from when we utilized the nested admin. So let's go into inventory and admin. It's all in here. I will just comment it out for now because you may like to utilize it in the future. So I'm going to comment out all of that. Now, obviously, that will remove all the functionality in the Django admin if you have been utilizing or working with that. So be careful with that. So when I run Pytest now, it says no module named nested admin, because in addition to that, we need to go into the settings and now remove it. I will just comment it out for now. So you can install that later if you prefer. And then we run Pytest again, and there we go. That was a little bit long-winded potentially, but hopefully you've gained some insights in how to manage warnings effectively. I tried to set that up so there were some actual real cases for us to resolve. Hopefully that's given you some information which is going to be useful to help resolve any problems, any warnings that you might have in the future.